Hello, friends, and welcome to the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast. These episodes have been remastered for better sound quality by Rob at Wrong Way Recording. When you need it done right, you choose Wrong Way. WrongWayRecording.com. Initially imagined by me as a 10-part series, the Diabetes Pro Tip series has grown to 26 episodes. These episodes now exist in your audio player between episode 1000 and episode 1025. They are also available online at diabetesprotip.com and juiceboxpodcast.com. This series features myself and Jennifer Smith. Jenny is a CDE and a Type 1 for over 35 years. This series was my attempt to bring together the management ideas found within the podcast in a way that would make it digestible and revisitable. It has been so incredibly popular that these 26 episodes are responsible for well over 500,000 downloads within the Juicebox Podcast. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Eversense Diabetes, makers of the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. And they have an amazing offer for you. Right now, at my link only, contournext.com/juicebox free meter, you can get an absolutely free Contour NextGen starter kit. That's contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. See all of the good work they're doing for people living with Type 1 diabetes at touchedbytype1.org and on their Instagram and Facebook pages. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. So let's start like this. I just put up like the 345th episode of the show, which is mind-bending to me, honestly.
What was the first because you'd been blogging for a long time before.
I blogged from 2007 consistently until 2015 when the podcast started, and now I have to admit the blog's a little more of a way of me sharing. I don't sit down and write from my heart as much as I used to because it's so much easier to do on the podcast. And you reach more people. But I blogged for that many years. The blog was strong. It was a million and a half clicks a year. One block of maybe 2 or 3 years, I got to like 2 million clicks, which was really big. But then I saw it kind of like trending away. And so in 2015, I started the podcast. And I really thought it was going to be, I guess this is maybe a neat place to say this, I thought I was going to go back and read my most popular blog posts like into this microphone. Because that was my expectation for it. I was like, some of these blog posts are really helpful to people. I'll read them and make them audio. I did that for 20 minutes one time, stopped, deleted the file, and was like, this is stupid. Nobody cares about this. Well,
I can say there are some people that would care about that. I've actually got a couple of clients who they love the podcast because they're audio. Mm-hmm. And when they read things, it doesn't stick. And so they have to reread. And finally, some of the adults that I've got are like, I just put the book down because they're like, I can't keep reading. I'm not retaining it. But if I hear it, it's there. It's in my brain. So. No,
I hear that. It just felt boring to me. Like I thought someone would like it. But I mean, if I'm being honest, I was trying to reach more people, not just, people who would literally be willing to listen to somebody read something dry. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, at least put some music behind it. But can you imagine how funny that would be if I was reading with music behind me and I was like, this guy's talking about boluses? It would be terrible.
Yeah.
And then it picked up. And like, but for people who are maybe coming in late to it, after a number of years of the podcast, I started thinking, there's like a real system here. Like I knew that while I was blogging, but when I could hear it, I thought, oh no, it's this piece and these 4 or 5 ideas. And when you bring them together, they're a 5.5 A1C. Like you just do these things and that's what happens, you know? And I had you on the show maybe twice. And I always wanted you to be back. And I thought she's the best guest I've ever had. Like, I mean, honestly, when it comes to diabetes, you and I think exactly alike about it from two completely different perspectives, which is weird and interesting.
It's nice.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And so I was somewhere one day and I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the tenets of the podcast and break them down with Jenny. If she wants to do this, I'm going to get a hold of her and see if she wants to do it. And that was a weird leap for me because until then, my real belief was that if you just listen to all the episodes, you'd hear things come up very kind of organically and they would stick to your brain better because you heard them conversationally. And I was a little scared to do
just specific topics.
More bulleted specific topics. Yeah. But then I realized I could do it with you because we have a rapport. Like I've talked to other people on the podcast and I try to talk to them about stuff and I find I'm stopping and starting and I'm like, oh, they're talking over me. I'm talking over them. I can't find a vibe, you know? But I knew I had that with you. So I contacted you and you were like, I'll do it. And at the time I was like, it'll be like 6 or 7, Jenny.
You've done more than that.
And I sent you a little list and you were really great. Like you took the list and you were like, I'd put them in this order. I think they make more sense in this order. And I was like, okay, great. And now I'm going to look. I'm actually going to diabetesprotip.com now because that little idea now has its own website, which is even strange.
It's great.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16. There are 17 pro tips. And this is going to be the 18th one. And then we're going to do pregnancy and we're going to keep going, right? And it spawned like defining diabetes, which I never thought was a thing that was needed until this one person sent me a note that said, hey, I wanted to thank you because until I listened to the podcast, I didn't realize I was on MDI. They took injections.
I remember you told me that.
Right. Yeah. And that made me think, wow, do some people really not understand some of the terms we're using? Let's define the terms for them, but simply not an hour conversation.
Right.
A little bit. Anyway,
also not a dictionary definition. I think, as I said, before, some people get things because they hear it in a different way or they read it in a different way. And I think the great thing about the podcast too, even with the pro tips part of it, is that it's broken down much more like layman's applicable. It's not what you get in a typical doctor education clinic.
And we did it a couple of times and I was like, damn, this is good. It went so well that I was like, give me your address, Jennifer. I am sending you a microphone. I was like, here.
Yes. So it sounds better now, hopefully.
Like, let's go. But one of the things that we did was bump and nudge. It gets talked about in the episodes, but it doesn't have its own episode. And I always kind of thought that was okay. Until in the last year, I looked at algorithm-based pumping and saw how my bumping and nudging was too much. It had gotten out of hand and it didn't realize it because it was so easy for us to do that we never looked back at the root cause of why we were bumping and nudging. And so this has been bothering me for like 6 months now. And I said to Jenny, I need a pro tip episode on this because not that bumping and nudging is a bad idea. It's a terrific idea.
Right.
But you need to understand it more. It's a bigger topic than I thought it was.
Mm-hmm. And I think you really like realized it when you guys started using the do-it-yourself, right?
As soon as day one came.
We talked and I was like, how much are you using temp basals?
Yes.
How much are you adding little micro corrections or adjustments or whatnot through the day? And you're like,
I don't know.
I never thought about it before.
A lot. So Jenny's the one who said it to me because we were trying to find, it was such an easy thing. Like you guys would hear me say before, like, I don't know Arden's insulin to carb ratio. Doesn't matter to me. I don't know what anything is. None of it matters, right? I know her basal rate and I know food. I look at food and I see food, but
you're like, oh, that looks like 5 units. Oh, that looks like I got to split it up and give some now and a whole bunch later. And, right.
And being flexible, which is terrific and important, what I didn't realize it was doing to me, you have to kind of like step back and look at a timeline of months maybe that develop into years, is that at some point meal X took 2 units at this basal rate of whatever it was. And then it took 2.5 and 3 and 3.5 and 4, but it happened so slowly I didn't notice. I didn't realize that I was now bolusing 6 units for something I used to bolus 4 units for. I mean, I did, but I never stopped and thought, I wonder how much of this meal insulin is attacking the food and how much of it is staying in her system for hours afterwards and maybe acting as basal.
Right.
And so I had bumped so much with insulin that I lost track of what Arden's baseline need was. It didn't matter because we were doing so well, but it did matter. And I learned that when I said, this algorithm won't work. This is ridiculous. Her blood sugar's all over the place, right? It's just crazy. And it's because I had lost track of how much insulin we were actually using versus how much my setting said we were using. Did I say that clearly? How
much was actually needed versus how much you were just intuitively correcting with, right? Adding a little bit extra because you needed it, but not really realizing, in general, I'm always adding extra here. And it probably is a setting issue. And I shouldn't be adding this much more all the time.
Right. And it had become such a way of life.
Right.
I didn't think of it anymore. So now I want to leave that thought here and we're going to come back to it later because I do think that being fluid around diabetes is incredibly important and that you can't just keep resetting your basal rates every day for all the variables that are going to come up in your world. And I noticed a long time ago that idea, that concept is what caused people problems, right? The idea of like, well, I'll go to my doctor and we'll find a basal rate. And oh, my doctor was great. They saw between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. we had some highs. So we moved our basal up at 1 a.m. or 12:30 a.m. and it worked. But then they started getting low, a couple weeks later. But I just fed the lows for 2.5 months and went back to the doctor and the doctor moved the basal again. And that's how that was considered a successful use of your physician and your insulin, right?
Correct.
And it probably still is in many people's minds. I saw that and thought, this doesn't work. I don't want to be involved in this. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. This podcast is it's partly in place because I don't like the math around diabetes. I don't like the waiting. I don't like we'll wait and see. All that stuff makes me uncomfortable. Like all the things that you're supposed to do, I just was always like, that seems wrong. Like I don't want to do that. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series is sponsored by Eversense Diabetes, makers of the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. And they have a unique offer just for listeners of the Juicebox Podcast. If you're new to Contour, you can get a free Contour NextGen starter kit by visiting this special link, contournext.com/juicebox free meter. When you use my link, you're going to get the same accurate meter that my daughter carries. contournext.com/juicebox free meter. Head there right now and get yourself the starter kit. This free kit includes the Contour NextGen meter, 10 test strips, 10 lancets, a lancing device, control solution, and a carry case. But most importantly, it includes an incredibly accurate and easy-to-use blood glucose meter. This Contour meter has a bright light for nighttime viewing, an easy-to-read screen. It fits well in your hand and features second chance sampling, which can help you to avoid wasting strips. Every one of you has a blood glucose meter. You deserve an accurate one. contournext.com/juicebox free meter to get your absolutely free Contour NextGen starter kit sent right to your door. When it's time to get more strips, you can use my link and save time and money buying your Contour Next products from the convenience of your home. It's completely possible that you will pay less out of pocket in cash for your Contour strips than you're paying now through your insurance. contournext.com/juicebox free meter. Go get yourself a free starter kit. While supplies last, U.S. residents only.
Within it, I think you also have to say that the technology that we have available today makes it more user friendly for people to learn how to make their own adjustments in the here and now. That might work then for a while, and then they make more adjustments. But, years ago, without technology, going to the doctor every 3 months, every 6 months, like I used to do when I was younger,
right,
that was the way to make adjustments. Now, could we have taken and done more data analysis in between the doctor visits? We could have, and my mom actually did. She was like, "This isn't working anymore. Let's just adjust here. Nope, you need some more insulin here." And I don't think she ever said it like that, but her explanation was always like, "Well, this was just too high. And if it's going to be too high again tomorrow, then you're just going to use more insulin for the next meal."
Right.
Okay, Mom, whatever.
Hey, lady, I'm with you. You're cooking, right? So it's good with me. You seem to care, so I'm going to go with you. Well, another issue in the space of people talking about diabetes in the past, it's a number of folds, but one of them is that nobody ever wants to say too much, right? They're always worried that they'll say something and it won't apply to the third person that hears it. And so that was part of what the pro tips were for, was to take information down to a point where, this really does apply to everyone. Not saying things that only worked for you or me, or noticing that my daughter needed something different after she started getting her period than she did before, and taking the time to talk through those differences, where writing about it is hard because you write something down, it's static. I write a blog post about my 9-year-old daughter. Somebody reads it, it now feels like a rule. I don't spend time
with my 9-year-old child. This is going to be the applicable method that I use.
And you don't take time to philosophize out that I bet you this will be different when she's 15. And writing doesn't work that way, but you can conversate that way. And so a lot of people in the past who were impacting the diabetes space were parents of younger children who, until your child gets older, you don't realize, you think this is diabetes, but this is diabetes in a kid that's not, coursing with hormones or growing as much as you think, or as active as you believe they are. When you're 8, you're like, "Oh, my kid plays baseball." Yeah, okay. Wait till your kid really plays baseball. Wait till they weigh 200 pounds and they're flying around. It's 110 degrees outside and they're throwing things through walls. It's an impact on your body. Wait till your kid's playing ice hockey as a high schooler. You know what I mean? Wait till
and
you
they've got
see what
practice
happens.
from 6 until 8 in the morning, and they've got practice again from 4 until 6 o'clock at night. I mean, sometimes those practices, I'm amazed with the kids that I work with. Their parents are like, "Well, she's got tennis from 6 o'clock until 7:30, and then she goes off to school, and then she's got another practice from 4 until 6. I'm like, seriously? I'm she's a tennis pro or what?
That's how you make a tennis pro. One in a million times. The other 990,000 times is how you make a kid who hates tennis eventually.
Right, exactly.
but so these people were doing great stuff, and they were talking about these ideas, but they didn't realize how specific they were to the age group they were talking about. And I think that's why this longer conversation, and why I mentioned how long the podcast has been up, has been important, because in my heart, as crazy as it sounds, I think if you want to have great success with your type 1 diabetes, you go back to episode 1 and you listen through, because you'll take a journey through somebody who's talking about a kid with a 9 or 10-year-old body that, you actually can hear in this podcast. Arden get older, Arden grow, Arden have problems, her start to get her period, changing devices, meters, all the way through. And I know it sounds crazy, but in 347 hours as of today, I think when it's over, you'll go, "Whew, okay." And then your kid's just going to have an A1C in the 5s. Or if you want it to be, or maybe you'll make an adjustment and it'll be in the 6s.
Right.
It also works for adults. And that was really cool. I hadn't had that greater expectation. I thought it would, but I didn't have a lot of adults weren't reading me as a blogger. You know what I mean? There were some, but there weren't a lot. Anyway, at some point, I recognized that, that was really long-winded. But I guess the people who listen they're used to that.
They're used to that
at this point. But it's a very long way of saying that you can't just set your basal rates up, set up your insulin to carb ratios, and go with that's what the pump told me and that's what the doctor told me to put in the pump.
Right.
Because things are going to change, sometimes day to day, sometimes hour to hour, activity to activity. There are going to be too many variables, and you can't stop every time. Like, imagine if I had to get up tomorrow and go, today is going to be a sedentary day. I will now go fix all of my basal rates for sedentary and change my insulin to carb ratio for sedentary. By the way, do you realize that that could end up for some people meaning more and for some people meaning less? It could end up meaning less for basal and more for insulin to carb, or vice, depending who you are and what you eat. And so when all that exists, what ends up happening to people is they just go, oh, today was a good day. Today was a bad day.
Yeah.
Right? They leave the settings and then they have good days and bad days. And what I thought was, if we stay fluid enough, you can almost be ahead of what's happening and make these adjustments. Okay.
Right.
All right. That's a long, long explanation. But to me, that's what led me to bumping and nudging. Now, for context, while Jenny and I are talking about it, I think of bumping as using insulin, bumping your blood sugar down. And I think of nudging as nudging your blood sugar up with carbs. Jenny thinks of it the exact opposite way. So don't get confused if one of us says one thing and one of us says the other. But in the end, the idea is to keep yourself between these smaller parameters, right? A range, a smaller range.
And the range is defined by you.
Right. Doesn't matter to me what range you choose. Right.
It's your chosen range, but the idea is to use food and insulin in a good advantage in both directions so that you can stay within that target.
Right. And so some of the things I learned as I went along.
I wish people could see us, by the way.
Holding our hands up. I was making air quotes around good and bad.
Right.
Probably just like, oh my God. You keep saying that out loud and someone's going to ask you to turn this into a YouTube thing and then we're going to be on camera and neither of us are going to be happy about that because you're going to have to hang up that stuff behind you and I'm going to have to get a haircut. Right. So. Right.
Which, by the way, is just like bags and, it's not random strangeness. It's like bags and like coats. That's it. On my door.
Jenny is now apologizing for something you can't see. That is very Midwest of you, by the way. You're like, oh, it's not a clutter. It's
nice people.
It's a very important thing where the children hang their bags.
It is. The easiest for them to get to.
All right, Jenny, we're off topic now.
Yes.
So anyway, so I'm going to do a little thing here, and please jump in whenever you want. In my mind, I guess I should first say that I understand this would be more difficult without a continuous glucose monitor. I really do.
Yes.
What I'm saying would be harder. You could do it. I still think you could do it. You'd have to do it a little less aggressively probably, and you'd be testing more. But what in my mind, what I see is that graph that goes along my daughter's Dexcom has a high line and a low line. And I take those lines from running, oh my God, which way is this? Is this parallel to the ground?
Yeah.
It is, right?
Correct. Wow, yes.
Yeah. I was asleep a lot in high school. None of you should be listening to this podcast, just so you know. So I take those two lines that are spaced apart evenly that run parallel to the ground, and I flip them up on their end. So they're vertical. So they're running vertical in my mind. And now they are a video game to me. They're like driving, right? It's a football field. I don't want to run out of bounds on the left or on the right. That's all it is to me. There's in play and out of play. So when I describe it in like talks, I discussed that like driving is interesting because it's you make a lot of imperceivable moves when you're driving, that if you jerk the wheel around, you swerve, and you don't want to do that. So as you notice yourself approaching the shoulder, you just turn the wheel back a tiny little bit and you come back into toe again, right? Like it comes back. Same thing with, if you're going to cross into the other lane, you just come back a little bit. You don't jerk the wheel around, because if you jerk the wheel around, you end up in the ditch or in the other lane, where you end up with much higher or lower blood sugars than you mean.
Right.
So I bump myself back. I nudge back. I use that insulin to help Arden stay in range. The problem that comes with jerking the wheel is that once you're in the ditch, you have to overcorrect again. And then you're on the roller coaster, right? Now I've said roller coaster, which now takes the graph back to being, the way it belongs in your mind for a second, not vertically, but you're up and you're down and you're just overcorrecting the whole way with food, with insulin, and you get the timing of the insulin so far off that some people, it doesn't stop. It goes into
and
overnight.
You just keep going that way.
Yeah. For not just for a day, for weeks and months and lifetimes of just, that's what my blood sugar does. It bounces up and down, and people say that, and it's heartbreaking to me. I'm like, no, just turn the wheel a little less. It's okay. I understand how it happens, and I think there are ways out of it. So I want to talk about some functional ways out of it. I guess people should understand the difference between a falling and a drifting blood sugar. So why don't you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, drifting is slow and dropping is fast. I think that's the easiest way. Drifting down and or even drifting up happens gradually over time. So again, if you're using a continuous monitor of any kind, you'll see this slow, continual change in blood sugar, little nudges kind of happening over the course of time. And since on all CGMs, each of those little dots on your graph represents about 5 minutes, each little drift up or down could be a change in glucose over a 5-minute time period, right?
Yeah.
So drifting being slower means you have more time to implement a change right now that could also be a smaller change than having to make drastic adjustments with food or insulin.
Right.
When you're dropping or rapidly rising, kind of the opposite, that requires more, whether it's more insulin or more food. It requires more because the change is happening very quickly now. And usually I see drifts happening either with a horizontal arrow on your CGM, or you might get that slight angled arrow either down or up. I consider those drifts.
Yeah.
I consider drops or rapid rises when you've got arrows pointing straight up or straight down. That's fast. Right. So you need to do something now.
Right. And so to start with lows, if you're 75 straight down on a Dexcom, that could mean 2 or 3 points per minute. Is that right? So every 5-minute change you could end up moving up to 15 points or something like that. Don't hold me to that, but fast is the point.
Correct.
So you don't when you're 80 straight down, you don't say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do a temp basal off for a half an hour here. That's not going to work. And there's reasons prior in the Diabetes Pro Tip episodes. Seriously, listen to them in order that will make sense to as why. But if you're just drifting down, one of those situations where it's noon and you're 100, and then it's 12:15 and you're 95, and you just got this little drift happening, you could possibly be at the end of a bolus that ended up being a little too strong, right? And maybe there's, an imperceivable amount of insulin left in there, a quarter of a unit, a half a unit, depending on your size. Maybe it's 2 units if you're an adult, right? And if you take away your basal insulin right there, it's possible that you can trade that extra bolus that's left and create what I sometimes talk about as like a black hole of basal, right? So keeping in mind that everything you do with your insulin now is for later because insulin doesn't work immediately. What if at noon, when you started to see that drift down, you took some basal away and that created a level? So now the end of that too strong bolus was acting as your basal, and your basal wasn't there. But keeping in mind, if you shut your basal off at noon, it's not going to probably start impacting you until
at least 1 o'clock.
Yeah, right, for a while. But at the same time, you were only drifting anyway. It was probably going to take you an hour to get from 100 to 60, where you'd then be drinking a juice. But instead, as you're hitting that 70 mark, you're all of a sudden into the time frame where there's no basal insulin, and you just level out. Now, it doesn't always work. I've done it and thought I'm a genius, and I've done it and thought, oh, I missed that. But trial and error will teach you, because there are a lot of different situations.
And I think some visual into that too, as you said, sometimes it works and sometimes it didn't quite hit the mark, but you weren't necessarily wrong to take the basal away. I think, especially again with the technology that we have today, not only can you see the drift, but if you are somebody who's using an insulin pump, you also have the visibility of insulin on board.
Right.
So if you have an idea how much insulin is left, like you said, an earlier bolus, maybe you were a little heavy-handed in it, or it was just, too much because you haven't quite figured out your ratios, or maybe it was, a guesstimate completely, or whatever it was, you still have some insulin on board. If you have an idea of where your basal is right now, and you know how much insulin is on board, taking basal away could substitute for some of the IOB that's left. Yeah. Absolutely. And like you said, it could nicely smooth things out and you just drift into a stable blood sugar. That might work if you've got IOB of 1 and your basal rate at that point is like 0.8 or 0.9 or even 1.1.
Right.
That could absolutely smooth out. If you've got 3 units of IOB and your basal is at 0.5,
not going to help.
Taking a half unit away, it's going to help a little, but you're still going to
not going to get the result. Right.
Correct.
So in my mind's eye, Touched by Type 1 has the back of people living with type 1 diabetes. Take, for instance, their D-Box program. Touched by Type 1 knows firsthand the intricacies of living with type 1 diabetes, and so their team has created a D-Box, which is a starter kit that provides important resources and supportive materials to individuals with diabetes. They want you to thrive. The D-Box is completely free and available to newly diagnosed people. All you have to do is go to touchedbytype1.org, go to the Programs tab, and click on D-Box. While you're there, check out all the other resources and programs available at touchedbytype1.org. Speaking of support, touchedbytype1.org is available in English and Spanish. Don't forget to find them on Facebook and Instagram, too. You do not want to miss what Touched by Type 1 is doing. When you have diabetes and use insulin, low blood sugar can happen when you don't expect it. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use glucagon option that can treat very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes ages 2 and above. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Years ago, I used to think of scales. So think of like the scales of justice, where each side has this big dish and you could, pile gold, weight, right? And so think of insulin on one side and carbs on the other, or the weight of your blood sugar on the other. And you can kind of imagine yourself throwing in a little on one dish and going, oh, that was too heavy, and taking a little out, and, or taking some out. Like, that's how I think of insulin. Like, put a little in, take a little out, and then, I say a lot on the podcast, and that I think we talk too much just about how insulin impacts the number, when there's so many other things to think about. How food impacts insulin, right? Like you'll hear me tell a story about like creating a drop and then catching it with food. And to me, that's how the food impacts the insulin. And it's just, it's a weird thing, but there's a lot of different ways to think about what's going on, that little game that's going on in your body between, the sugar that's in your blood, or that's going to be in your blood, or the food that's going to put the sugar there, and the insulin that's trying to take it out again.
Right.
So anyway, you can bump with a temp basal, right? It just is like to take it away, like Jenny and I have explained. Also, the same goes for going up. If you see, a 90 that turns into a 95, that turns into 100, it's going to be one of those slow drifts up. There's nothing worse than that, in my opinion. I always think of it as the mountain climber on The Price is Right, that game, because every time you're like, it's going to stop. There's no way that guy's falling off the end. They're going to figure this out. Like, and it just totally, and it just goes on forever, right? And then that little guy just plops off the end, and then Drew Carey takes your money back from you, and you're screwed and you walk away, right? So like, you see this 90 blood sugar that's drifting up. 2 hours later, it's 250, and you think, why didn't I do something? I should have done something, Maybe that's a temp basal increase. Maybe it's a bolus. But all I know is that a 120 or whatever wherever you decide to be, diagonal up, can be brought back to a stable 90 with far less insulin than it will take to address the 250 2 hours later.
Correct.
And when you're only using small bumps of insulin, you're very less likely to cause a low. And so when you see that 120, to me, that's you approaching, the line on the side of the road, and you just want to come back almost an imperceivable amount with the wheel or the tiniest bit of insulin to bring it back in line. Now, I have done this with my daughter for years with an amazing amount of success. And I've seen scores of people who listen to this podcast do it too. And it works. It really does. But the idea is that you're not always going to get your bolus right. You're not always going to have the right amount of basal going for your specific situation that's happening right then and there.
Correct.
Wow. I'm more clear when you're with me. That's weird. That's weird. Don't tell your husband that.
I think, and too, if you wanted to add some definition to, like, people always ask, well, how much? When I start to see this drift, how much should I add? Well, one, again, everybody's physiology is a bit different. Your sensitivity to insulin. So a 0.1 might be what works for you. A 0.7 might be what needs to be in, somebody else's case. But I think if you give definition to direction of blood sugar, again, using today's technology beneficially, and you mentioned before kind of the directional arrows and what that indicates as far as a drift up or a drift down and how much is happening. If you're wondering how much to add with insulin when you do start to see a drift up, the angled arrow is really kind of a rate of change of about 1 to 2 points per minute, right? So if you're aiming to see, okay, I'm at 90, I'm not done anything, and now my blood sugar, it looks like it's starting to come up. I don't know why, but it's happening. If you experience that, a 90 with a angled arrow up 1 to 2 points per minute in the next 30 minutes, if you do nothing, your blood sugar could be 30 to 60 points higher. Right? So if you use that to your advantage and you say, okay, I could be on the low end 30 points higher, it could be one at 120. I kind of know what I would use to offset, a 50-point rise in my blood sugar. Maybe I need to just add a little bit, like 0.2, or maybe I need to take a 0.5 extra. That's kind of a way that's a little bit more, if you're the math person, may help you to get a little bit more precise and not worry about then ending up on the downdrift later.
And if you're me, what you do is you try something, and then the next time you try something different if that didn't work.
Less or more.
Yes, just more or less, whatever, try. And it's important to remember that you're not going to get it right the first time. And even if you do get it right the first time, the variables may change the second time. It becomes an art. Like, it really does. Like, just knowing how much to push, just a little bit. Like, you squeeze too tight and it's too much. You're not enough and you let go. And using Jenny's example right there and flipping it to getting lower, you don't always need the whole juice box. You don't always need every piece of candy in the package. Sometimes you can nudge with food, right? And I know that 15 carbs, 15 minutes is the rule of thumb. But if you're using a CGM, you can see it better. You don't have to. 15 carbs, 15 minutes is when people are blind to what their blood sugar is and they're trying to stop themselves from having a seizure. That's important. I'm not saying no, okay? And I'm not telling you not to do it. But I'm telling you that if you do it and find yourself to be 300 later, you didn't need all 15 carbs, right? And by the way, if you do get into a panicky situation and you've got to just hork in carbs, I'm not going to tell you to not do it. What I am going to tell you is that when the dust settles, you need to figure out how much insulin you've got to bolus for that food you just took.
Correct.
Right. Like, maybe not for all of it, but some of it's going to need insulin. You have to stop the bouncing. You got to make sure you can't get on that roller coaster. Like, don't get on it. It's maddening. And The only way off of that roller coaster, by the way, in my opinion, is you stop taking in carbs and you get back to level again. Like I can knock Arden off that roller coaster while she's still eating, but that is a ninja level event. Like you need to be really good at that to stop a roller coaster in between food, and you'll get there. And it
takes understanding sensitivity.
Right.
You very well know, and I'm sure Arden does as well. You guys know her sensitivity, and you've paid enough attention to say, okay, we need this much right now because of all of these other variables in the picture, or you need this much less right now or whatnot. And you do get to that level when you start to pay enough attention, to your personal sensitivity and the precision that you need.
100%.
I think, the 15 and 15 is age old. I mean, that's what I started with 32 years ago, is 15 and 15. And we didn't have the visibility of blood sugar changes at that point. We didn't.
Or even just a meter, by the way, that only takes a tiny drop of blood and isn't, and this beautiful lance that, it doesn't hurt that badly while you're doing it. You were stabbing yourself with a sword and dumping insulin dumping your blood into a box, waiting for it. We kind of
called it the guillotine. It was like this big old drum that hammered down on your finger. And I would inch my finger slightly away from the little underneath platform from where it jabbed my finger. I would just hold it back so it didn't quite jab it. That was my adjustment to the lancet depth, right? That was the only adjustment I had at that point. But I mean, a point being really that you have some tools now that allow you a lot more precision in how you bump and nudge.
Yeah,
you do.
Use them.
And with smart tools today too, and I think this is a good place to mention it, is with our smart hybrid closed loop systems that are on the market today, that adjustment with carb, the 15 and 15 is 100% too much.
Right.
100% too much. With most of these systems on the market today, when you're adding a little bit of carbohydrate, we're talking a little bit of carb, because the system has already been helping you coming into this drop in blood sugar. So 15 grams, 100% is going to be way too much. Yeah. You might need 2 or 3 Skittles, which is 2 or 3 grams of carb. You might need half of a glucose tablet. You might need a quarter of a juice box. So,
yeah. Well, you know what? I want to go a little deeper into this, faster rises and falls. You see people online every once in a while. It's very common, actually. They're injecting and they'll put in the measurement for their slow acting insulin as fast acting by mistake. I take you'll see an adult, I take 20 units of Lantus every day and I just gave myself 20 units of Novolog. And they're online. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I'm just just figure out how many carbs that takes and eat them. That makes sense to me, right? And give that a try. So say you do that, not that, but say you have a meal that really needed 5 units and for some reason you thought 7. And the next thing you know, 40 minutes later, there's an arrow down on your CGM. You're falling fast. You need to eat the carbs to stop that. So it's a much bigger nudge, right? It's more like a nudge with a sledgehammer now. And you need to eat the carbs to stop that. In the same thought process, if you miss greatly with that insulin, it should have been 7 and you use 5 and 30 minutes later, you're 2 arrows straight up. I don't mess around there. I am stopping those arrows, right? And you think, well, okay, say it was literally a mistake. You meant to do 7 and you did 5. So you think, oh, okay, 2 units. That 2 units isn't going to do it anymore because you have all this momentum, right? There's this momentum. You have to stop the momentum. You've got a higher number than you thought about when you decided on the insulin the first time. There's a lot to think about. There's the number, the momentum, and getting you back without making you low. There are times that I'll take what I think the amount is that's going to stop the arrows, plus the amount that's going to change the number back to where I want it to be. And I realize if I give her this insulin right now, she's going to end up low later. Mm-hmm. But I still give it to her. And then there's a moment where I take the basal away.
Right?
to try to do what I mentioned earlier, eat up that extra. So I needed all that force from that insulin up front because of this situation we're in, but I don't need the tail of it later. But the tail's going to be there. So what if I took her basal away so that it wasn't basal plus the tail?
Right.
And so I get the benefit of the oomph up front without the kick in the pants
back
of
end.
what comes later, right?
Right.
That's another way to think of bumping and nudging, in my opinion. So there's a lot.
And it takes learning the tools. It takes learning the tools to use, things like people who are using MDI or multiple daily injections. It becomes harder because you can't take basal away.
Yes.
Once it's injected, it's there. So if you are heavy-handed with a correction because you really want that double arrow to stop,
you're going to be
you have to be ready on the back end with carbs to stop the drop.
Do you want to know what a pump does that multiple MDI doesn't do? It stops you from having to take a bunch of injections. It allows you to do temporary basal increases, decreases, extended boluses. That's it. And you don't have to carry pens with you and wonder if your insulin's getting warm while you're at the water park. Like that's it. I mean, I think to me, it sounds like a very little bit, but it's a lot if you're going to be reactive like this and stay flexible and things like that. I'm not saying you can't do it with injections. I know plenty of people who do. Yeah. They very commonly are adults or, kids who just don't care about the injections, because there's going to be a moment when you're going to put in a little insulin and realize it's not enough and have to put in a little more. And now that's 2 needles, instead of 2 pushes of a button. I think that,
or certain kinds of food, which we've talked about in other episodes, needing a pump to cover differently over a longer period of time. With an injection, you can't do that unless you're willing to just take more injections with more insulin.
So now here's the next thing about bumping and nudging. You get what you expect a little bit. And I want to, just before I tell you about that, I want to tell you that what Jenny just said shouldn't have been glossed over. There's other parts to this. I'm talking about bumping and nudging within a fairly perfect system, meaning I have my daughter's basal well in hand. I'm not that far off with her meal boluses if missed. We're not just like running around with our hair on fire going like, it was, and I do
just here, feed here, give more here.
Yes,
take it away.
That would be insane. And I do mean this without sounding like I'm trying to pimp the content. If you go back and start at the beginning of the pro tips, or if you want to power listen, by the way, those of you who start at the beginning of the podcast and listen right through, you have my respect. I thank you very much, because it's why the downloads are so good, and it really helps me. So thank you very much. But at least go back to the pro tips and listen through, because then you'll get to a point where bumping and nudging really is a good tool. But
it doesn't happen not 100% of the time.
It's not always going to work. Right. Like there are going to be times where it doesn't work. And it happened to me last night with Chinese food. So we came out of a pump change and went right into Chinese food, which just shows my arrogance, really. Because I was like, this won't be a problem. But what I didn't take into account is that for the past 72 hours, Arden has just needed more insulin. Like there are foods that don't make Arden spike that are making her spike for the last 3 days. I don't know why. It's not important why. It's just happening. Like soup. She's having like a clam chowder out of a can, and I can't get her under like 250 like 45 minutes later. Like I'm like, what's happening? And it'll go away, because the day before this started, her blood sugar was like 85 for 17 hours in a row. So, it'll cycle through. We'll figure it out. Maybe it'll end up being a variable that needs adjusting. I don't think it will be, but I'll see. But that's not the point. The point is we came from a pod change right into Chinese food. And boy,
good luck with that.
I did not do well with that. And so I want to first tell you that when I say, oh my God, I did not do well with that, what I mean is her blood sugar was between like 175 and 210 for a number of hours afterwards. I know you're thinking, shut up. I would love that.
300.
Right. Yeah. People are like, really? That's your complaint? It's not a complaint. It's just I missed, right?
Right.
And there was a time, 5 hours, honestly, where she needed, I bolused a bunch of times, and I never once got it right. I was never strong enough with it And I have to admit, it was because I was tired and I didn't want to be up all night. So I erred a little on the side of caution, not a lot. And I kept pushing. So, but I did not cause her to get low afterwards, which is
a win.
It felt like that to me. And I'll tell you why. And I want to put this in this episode too. So very recently, I wore the Dexcom Pro continuous glucose monitor. And I was very happy to find out that I am apparently not pre-diabetic. As I was texting Jenny, as I was putting it, I'm like, I'm going to find out I have type 2 diabetes, right? Like, I'm like, I was very happy that I didn't. Obviously, I was grateful. But I got to see what a pancreas does when it's doing what it's supposed to do. And I have to tell you that there is nothing I ate, no matter how low glycemic or high glycemic, that got my blood sugar over. I mean, I told Jenny I had to eat 2 pieces of cake to get my blood sugar to like 135, 140 one time, right?
Right.
But as I look back over the day, my standard deviation was like 11. My average blood sugar was, I don't know, like 90 or 80 or something, 85 or 90, right? But I still went up a little gracefully, 120 most of the time, back down again. That happened when I ate. And I had already changed my mind about my expectations for Arden over the last couple of years. And you guys have heard me loosen up on the idea of like stopping every spike. Like I'm not a flatline person. I don't feel like my daughter's blood sugar needs to be a flatline. I do believe that she has type 1 diabetes and that letting a flat line get away from you turns into a disaster that takes way too long to fix, which is why all this is important. But I don't care if she eats and her blood sugar goes up to 120, 130 and comes back down again. I think that's fine as long as she's not low on the other side. I start getting a little hinky over 140 in my heart. I'm a little like, that's too much, and it's not to say I wouldn't try to stop a 120 if I thought I had the answer to it. But I don't know. It seems important for me to tell you that if your pancreas is working, your blood sugar is not always 85. It just isn't. So be a little easy on yourself, have good expectations, but understand that my daughter, your kid, Jenny, you don't have the mechanism to it isn't just going to put the brakes on for you. So that's why you can't, I say you never get high if you don't get high. That's sort of what I mean by that. Like, stop the arrows. Stop it before it starts, right?
Well, into this kind of experience that you had too, I think one of the funny texts that I got from you was relative to pre-bolus.
Yeah. I was
right?
like, I find myself wanting to pre-bolus.
I pre-bolus better than my own pancreas pre-boluses, I think is what your text was, because you had seen a difference in what you had done for the same meal for Arden with her pre-bolus versus what your own pancreas was doing. And I think you said something like, I wish I could get my pancreas to pre-bolus. And I was like, well, your pancreas kind of does actually do that. The working pancreas body kind of does do this like pre-bolus
right.
sort of thing, right?
So Jenny's tried to explain to me, and if this is true, she said that sometimes when you smell food or you get hungry, your body anticipates that your blood sugar is going to go up and gets a little working on things prior.
Correct.
That's really cool. But what she's pointing out, and I am a little embarrassed, is that after a couple of days, I would look at, like, I'd be cooking and I would think to myself, like, I'd be rubbing my stomach wherever I thought my pancreas was. I don't even know. And so I was just like, man, do it now, brother. We're about to have pasta. Like, go, But no, Jenny's not wrong. And I'm not bragging. I was better at stopping spikes with Arden than my body was for me. And I was really like comforted by that. I was like, wow, this bullshit on that podcast really works.
Right.
And I was really thrilled. I was like, wow, I because it felt like it wasn't overkill. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, I thought, I'm not taking this too seriously. I'm taking this the right amount of serious.
Right.
And it just really was. It was a great experience. I want to thank Dexcom for letting me wear the Pro. It was really nice. I was the only that was only worn by national media outlet people and me. And I was very grateful, and I really appreciate that Dexcom appreciates the podcast and sees it as what it is.
Benefits.
Yeah, not. I'm just not a guy with a podcast. Like I was like, wow, they really like. I don't know. It made me feel good. Anyway, point is, the last point, I guess, of all this is that bumping and nudging is terrific. It's great while you're learning things, while you're learning about how to bolus for meals, while you're learning about activities. All that stuff's great, but it's not a long-term everyday solution. And
Correct.
I didn't recognize that people wouldn't translate out of it eventually. Like just go like, oh, okay, it didn't happen to me. I said it at the beginning. I didn't realize it wasn't happening to me. And then finally, and again, I have to thank the people listening because we started the private Facebook group, which I'm not particularly active in, but see every day. I started watching, and this is when I said to Jenny, I need a pro tip on bumping and nudging. I was like, oh my God, these people are doing this all the time, like constantly. I'm like, it's not for constantly. And so here we are. So if you heard us do Defining Diabetes Bump and Nudge, which literally just came out last week, I said in there, what I didn't realize about bumping and nudging when I started doing it was that it's as much of a diagnostic tool as it is,
Yes.
a tool for keeping your blood sugars in order.
Correct.
So, Jenny, when you start seeing yourself bumping and nudging too much, what should you be doing?
Then you should be going back. Personally, what I do, and with the people that I work with, what I do in data analysis is I look at a cumulative and I say, over the course of this time, whether it's a week or 3 days or 2 months or whatever we want to look at together, we can say, well, goodness, we've had a lot more use of temp basals that are not specific to like activity reason or a food-based reason, like you always eat Friday night pizza or whatever it is, and you need that kind of a tool for. But goodness, there's a lot of corrections happening after meals all the time. Or there's a lot of, you're using temp basals to cut off insulin all the time. If that's happening, and while it might be proving to give you the results that you want, there's a bigger picture there saying there's either not enough insulin for some reason now, so we need more in the basal, or we need to add a change to your ratios so that you do get more a robust type of bolus for food, and then you shouldn't have to follow it so heavily after and adjust with extra insulin all the time.
Right.
So that becomes looking at information and saying, for whatever reason, I just need more basal now. Let's pop it into place. For whatever reason, my ratios look like they're not covering well, or they're covering too much. Let's take some away. Let's add some in. And let's make sure that I'm not bumping and nudging now 100% of the day, because that shouldn't be the case.
Right.
You shouldn't have to work that hard, essentially.
Yeah. I think one of the benefits of the podcast is that it eventually should make the management of diabetes simpler and less impactful on your moment to moment. You shouldn't constantly be like, okay, a little more, a little less, a little more. Like that's, algorithms do that, but you shouldn't have to do that.
Right.
If you find yourself doing it, look back and just try to separate a variable from a constant and address the constants and keep bumping the variables. That's all. It gets that easy. It took me a while to figure it out, and that's why I'm here saying it to you, because I thought, oh gosh, what if people don't figure it out? Like I started having this horror in my head that people would just be like bumping blood sugars for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Right.
It's no
I'm
big
going to be
deal.
following my child until they're 50 and I'll be 89 and what's happening to their blood sugar?
Picture people in my head that haven't seen the sun in 3 years with their hair all wired like they've been electrocuted, and they're like, my kid's A1C is 5.5. Their blood sugar hasn't gone over 110 in 6 years. I'm fine. Please don't be like that. Please. No. Oh my God, it would break my heart if that's what's happening to you. And don't get me wrong, by the way, in the beginning, while you're starting to figure it out, you may be a little like that.
That is what it feels like. Yes. That is what it feels like.
You should be able to get past that.
Right.
And I hope this has been helpful. Did we miss anything, Jenny? Because you guys everyone listening should just take a second to realize that Jenny and I don't have any notes in front of us. Like we're not working off a list. And I still think we got in the time frame through everything I wanted to say. Do you feel like that?
Yes, absolutely. We did a good job.
Somebody should ring a bell, or I'm going to spike a football when I'm done this. That's right. I want to say, this is something I was going to say later when I was editing it together, but I want to say it with Jenny here instead. I appreciate that the people listening care about this. Like, I really do. Like, I think it's wonderful that you all want better or easier or simpler and aren't just throwing up your hands and saying, I don't know, there's good days and there's bad days.
Right.
I think it's really wonderful. I think that we're creating a feeling throughout the diabetes world that's going to help people in the future. It might not help you as much as it's going to help someone else. But I got, it's funny. It's not a note, but somebody posted this on social media the other day, and I'm not going to put their comments in, their name into it, but I want to tell you like how amazing I thought this was. This person is relaying that their child, a 13-year-old who's only been diagnosed for 4 weeks, listens to the podcast with their parents, went into the doctor 4 weeks later, advocated for themselves for a pump, explained that she wanted to use extended boluses. She tried it with MDI, showed her doctor how she tried it, explained that she wants to do temp basal adjustments in the anticipation of exercise and activity, and started rattling off everything she learned from the Pro Tip episodes.
Wow.
And even rolled in with her Omnipod demo that she got through the podcast and persuaded the endo to approve the pump at the next appointment. And that's
awesome.
And that endo normally makes you wait 6 months. And that's from these episodes. And so I imagine not just the happiness for that child that's coming, but that maybe now the doctor's like, why am I waiting? You know what I mean? Right. Why am I making people wait? Couldn't I just do this with them?
Right.
That's exciting for me. And it's everyone's desire to do better. And then your willingness to say it when you get to the doctor's office.
Well, and maybe even from that doctor's perspective, maybe, this person obviously went in and said, hey, I've learned all of this from this one place. Maybe the doctor now has a reference to say, hey, if you want a little bit more and you come back to me knowledgeable enough and can say, hey, this is what I know now. This is what I want to be able to use, why I want to be able to use it. Again, I think a lot of clinicians are just conservative because they're worried, right? They're conservative for many reasons, but I think worry is a big one. And they want some outcomes showing, yes, my patient is now ready for this. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think, again, with the technology we have today, I think people are more ready earlier than they may have been years ago. I don't think that people should make the mistake that this is some special girl. Do you know what I mean? Like seriously, it sounds self-aggrandizing. I really don't mean it to be. She just listened to these 17 or 18 Pro Tip episodes, and in 4 weeks, look where she is. And I don't know that everybody could be, but I think my experiences are that a lot of people are, and so that it's possible. I'm in my heart. I hope right now that doctor is listening to this going, well, that sounds like something that happened. Like, I hope he went and was like, I wonder what that kid listened to. Like that's what I want. I want everybody to be healthier and easier and less encumbered and anxious and all the crap that comes with having diabetes. So Jenny, I wanted you to hear that. Thank you. Yeah, no. And I think that's a good cumulative of my overall, when I had set out going to college, knowing what I wanted to go to school for and eventually what I wanted to become, it was a very like general, I want to become a diabetes educator because I had really awesome educators as a kid myself. But I never, I didn't have a broad idea of what I really wanted. I knew I wanted to be able to share what I knew with people, and I wanted it to make a difference, like it made a difference for me when I was younger, 100%. And didn't have the technology or anything that we have today, right? Yeah. So, in what I get to do every day, I love it. Yeah. But what I like more is that I love this connection that I've had because of you, because of the podcast and what you've put together. I feel like I reach so many more people than just the individual people that I get to work with every day. I feel like kind of, especially these pro tips, what we've put together, it's just able to reach so many more people in a way it's free.
Yeah.
It's great.
And thank you. I felt like little butterflies, and I looked away from Jenny while she was talking. I got embarrassed. I'm now embarrassed that I couldn't keep looking at her through a video screen while she was saying something nice. I need therapy. Anyway, thank you. It really is terrific. It would obviously not be the same without you. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks.
Cool. All right.
Yay.
Well, we did a good job here. I'm going to let you go back to your life, which is probably just talking to somebody else about diabetes in a second.
Actually, it will be. My husband went off to work, and my kids are hanging out watching. They're watching. I think they're watching Dino Dan right now, and I could hear my little man outside the door. He's like, "Mommy, I want a snack." I'm like, "Okay, Mommy, I'll be there in a minute."
We're doing important work. Go back to what you're doing. All right. Well, go take care of him, and thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Thanks.
I want to thank Ascensia Diabetes for sponsoring the Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series. Don't forget, you can get a free Contour NextGen starter kit at contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. If you're enjoying the remastered episodes of the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast, you have Touched by Type 1 to thank. TouchedByType1.org is a proud sponsor of the remastering of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. Learn more about them at touchedbytype1.org. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeGlucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. Jenny Smith holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She is a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring systems. She's also had type 1 diabetes for over 35 years, and she works at integrateddiabetes.com. If you're interested in hiring Jenny, you can learn more about her at that link. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, listen, there's 26 episodes in this series. You might not know what each of them are. I'm going to tell you now. Episode 1000 is called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. Episode 1001, all about MDI. 1002, all about insulin. 1003 is called Pre-Bolus. Episode 1004, Temp Basal. 1005, Insulin Pumping. 1006, Mastering a CGM. 1007, Bump and Nudge. 1008, The Perfect Bolus. 1009, Variables. 1010, Setting Basal Insulin. 1011, Exercise. 1012, Fat and Protein. 1013, Insulin, Injury, and Surgery. 1014, Glucagon and Low BGs. In episode 1015, Jenny and I talk about emergency room protocols. In 1016, Long-Term Health. 1017, Bump and Nudge, Part 2. In episode 1018, Pregnancy. 1019, Explaining Type 1. 1020, Glycemic Index and Load. 1021, Postpartum. 1022, Weight Loss. 1023, Honeymoon. 1024, Female Hormones. And in episode 1025, we talk about transitioning from MDI to pumping. Before I go, I'd like to share 2 reviews with you of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. One from an adult and one from a caregiver. I learned so much from the Pro Tip series when our son was diagnosed last summer. It really helped get me through those first few very tough weeks. It wasn't just your explanations of how it all works, which were way better than anything our diabetes educator told us, but something about the way you and Jenny presented everything, even the scary stuff, that reassured me that we could figure out how to deal with this and to teach our son how to deal with it too. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. This podcast is a game changer. 25 years as a type 1 diabetic, and only now am I learning some of the basics. Scott brings useful information and presents it in digestible ways. Learning that pre-bolus doesn't just mean bolus before you eat, but means timing your insulin so that it is active as the carbs become active, took me already from a decent 6.5 A1C down to a 5.6 in the past 8 months. I've never met Scott, but after listening to hundreds of episodes and joining him in his Facebook group, I consider him a friend. Listening to this podcast and applying it has been the best thing I have done for my health since diagnosis. I genuinely hope that the Diabetes Pro Tip series is valuable for you and your family. If it is, find me in the private Facebook group and say hello. If you're enjoying the Juicebox Podcast, please share it with a friend, a neighbor, your physician, or someone else who you know that might also benefit from the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.